All right, good morning. Today we are doing infection control. Just going to grab it onto the screen. The code is HLTINF001. Oops, I got the wrong thing on my screen. New share. Feel like that's the right one. Okay, here we are. Okay, so with this particular unit, you will find that you have the activities, you have a UPK, but you also have a workplace observation and a third-party report. So we'll go through that later. Let's just go through the unit for now. Comply with infection prevention controls and policies and procedures. Now more than ever, infection control is a topic of much interest, but it's also a topic that you're going to find beneficial in any job. Doesn't matter what the job is, whether it's retail, whether it's childcare, customer service, doesn't matter. Please excuse me, I have really bad hay fever today. Thanks to winter going and spring coming, everybody's mowing their lawn, so I'm all blown up, but we'll get through it. Now, the first thing I want you to do is just remember that we want to get through the concept. So concept being, what is this unit actually about? This unit is about following standard and additional precautions. Okay, so precautions are something that predominantly are in place so they don't hurt us. It's almost like having insurance. A lot of people go to me, oh, is it really necessary to wear this, 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 and this? It's probably not necessity, but it's preventative. Okay, so understanding what a precaution or a prevention method is. So hand hygiene, hand washing. Okay, hand hygiene is different than hand washing. Hand hygiene is things like not touching your face, not touching things that you don't need to. The chain of infection. So how do we actually get an infection? How to break the chain of infection. All right. Implementing hand care procedures that cover cuts and abrasions. Following your organisation's procedures for choice and use of personal protection. So you can see that the contents page clearly shows you what you're about to cover, what the concept is. Procedures for environmental cleaning, surface cleaning, how to clean your equipment. Going on to handling, transporting and processing of linen in a manner that controls infection. Handling linen. Now I remember when we were cleaning a hotel once, someone had been sick, vomited and diarrheaed in the bed, and they had left it and obviously gone for a shower, come back. I think they maybe slept in the second bed or on the lounge, and the cleaner came in the morning, and it was before I started working at this hotel. And we had the cleaning contract and they were telling us this story, and she just bundled up the linen, put gloves on, bundled up the linen, put it in a separate bag. Some of the spores, she breathed them in and she was hospitalised. So she did get an infection. She got incredibly sick and ended up hospitalised because those kinds of bacteria and viruses and things like that are incredibly ferocious. Following procedures for contaminated waste. So different kinds of waste here. Colour coding waste, clinical waste, general waste. What is general waste? General waste is waste that can't be recycled, but that is not biological waste. So, you know, it's really important that you read through this unit and get an understanding of what these things actually mean. Following procedures for handling and cleaning of equipment. Identifying, responding to situation where additional precautions might be needed. Identifying infection hazards and risks, types of infection, types of risks, the methods you're going to infection methods and other sources of infection, infectious diseases, and basic microbiology. So this is basic. This is just telling you the basics of this is what can happen. Identifying your area of responsibility and responding to situations. We can see a bit more risk assessment, risk matrix. I'm actually finding that quite a lot of you are into this unit and don't know what a risk matrix is. It's been covered quite a few times. So maybe spend a little bit of time on the risk matrix and especially the hierarchy of risk control. So we've got some control measures here. Following the risk measures, protocols, placing appropriate signage out, removing spills, minimizing contamination, identifying and separating into contaminated zones, confine records, materials, and medicaments. Medicaments is medical items, okay? So there's a clean zone and a not so clean zone. Nearly to the end here, and then confining those things to a confinement zone and a clean zone. Now, when you're reading through your unit of competency, yes, we have the unit mapping at the front, the elements and the performance criteria, but really the book commences when you get to 1.1. So here it is here. Okay, so at the beginning of each unit, it tells you what to expect. It tells you what to expect for the rest of the unit. Follow hand hygiene practices in accordance with organisations' policies and procedures. Now, as you read each section, hand hygiene, hand washing procedure, how to go about the hand washing procedure. What I want you to do is I want you to start highlighting. I don't know if I can highlight because oops, I don't know what I've done there. But I want you to highlight, say, hand washing procedure. Hand washing procedure may include to wash your hands, follow these steps, and just highlight the bullet points. Our brain learns through colour and our brain learns through highlighting parts that we're supposed to remember. So when you get to the question, when you get to your activity, you'll notice with activity 1A, that was a lot of material. So when you get to the question 1A, you want to have learnt, you want to have read that material. So question 1A is a case study and takes all of that information into account. So one of the things that you can do when you are reading through here is convince your brain you're interested, for starters. Implementing hand care procedures and covering cuts and abrasions. By the end of this chapter, the learner will be able to identify 3 examples of hand care procedures and list the steps to treat cuts and abrasions successfully. Now you can hear in my voice, I'm kind of using a tone that my brain is going to be like, oh, okay, we're interested in something here. I'm not reading it like identify through, okay, let's handle treats, cuts and abrasions. Yep, okay, zoom on. So do not go answer shopping. Don't go to the question and then come back to the answer. Read the material through. Hand care procedures. It's also important that you take good care of your hands to make sure that your skin is kept healthy and free of contaminants. Hand care may include, but is not limited to, suitable water-based hand creams that are registered with the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. Using warm water for hand washing, drying hands thoroughly after hand washing, wearing heavy-duty gloves that when handling irritating chemicals. Following these measures will ensure the skin is not damaged during the hand washing process and make you less susceptible to infection, which is true. And with how much hand washing we're doing at the moment and how much sanitizing we're doing at the moment, having a really good hand cream will be important if you go and get a job as a cleaner. So when we go down to the question now, it says to us, question 1B, identify 3 examples of hand care. And it's only asking you for 3, but there's 4. And you just take 1, 2, 3, and pop it in the question. List the steps to treat cuts and abrasions. We can see down here covering cuts and abrasions, and first aid treatment includes. Now, when it says list the steps, or says provide 3, and they are right here, you can copy those over. That's fine. That's totally fine. Now, these questions are not difficult until we get a little further down the line. So we're currently at 1B, list the steps to treat abrasions. 1C, Amelia works within a hospital at her local town. So what they're wanting you to do is take the information that you are learning in 1.3 and apply it to this case study. This is a really easy one. Choose 2 options of PPE. Now, it just gives you them here. Gives you the options in here. Right here. So there's 2 options that are correct for this case study. So you've got to read the case study because surgical face mask or footwear might not be applicable. So for 1C, question 1, there's 2 items of PPE you need to find. For question 2, outline how the PPE should be used according to the organisation's procedures and policies. You don't know this organisation except for what's been given to you in the case study. So it says here, organisational procedure for using PPE is, and it gives you the answer in the case study. All right, 1D, identify 3 procedures which should be followed for respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette. So we get to that section. We read through this information. Respiratory hygiene is important as a means of preventing the transmission of respiratory infections, for example, influenza, COVID. In healthcare settings, infection control measures for the purpose of ensuring that an infection doesn't spread out outlined below. Cough etiquette is about trying to stop the spread of respiratory secretions. Secretions being something that's secreted. Tears, mucus, snot when you sneeze or spit is secreted out from your body. Sweat is secreted. So procedures include. So this is the 3 items that cover the procedure, the cough etiquette procedure. Okay, so when it's asking you to list them and it's asking for 3, just copy those over. You do not need to be putting this stuff into your own words, especially in infection control, because it's all there and it's very clear this is what you need to do. If it was sort of you can do this or you might do this, then you might change it. Activity 1E, what cleaning procedures might you follow in a care environment? So now we're starting to talk about the care environment. And you'll see this chapter, you've got 4 things. Environmental cleaning. Environmental cleaning just means that you clean the general environment that you're working in. So it's not environmental cleaning from a recycling or environmental perspective. It's environment to what environment are you cleaning that you're working in. Cleaning procedures include but are not limited to. So when it says what cleaning procedures may you need to follow in a care environment, list 3, they're talking about these, list 3 of these. Then it says what PPE should be included in a spill kit. There it is right there, PPE. Now you don't need to put all of those. You can just put, you don't need these ones here, just put, you know, a spread, say 3 or 4. Okay, how should you clean surfaces between patients? Explain in no more than 100 words. And I just want to remind you that when they say explain, it means a little bit of a story. Tell me the story. In a care environment, you should clean the surfaces between patients because the way you go about that is you think about these things. It's essential that all surfaces are cleaned. So it talks about the different fittings, surfaces, floors. Then it goes on to talk about surfaces and surface cover, what type of cleaning equipment, other considerations when choosing a product, so the cleaning process, some general guidelines. Now, a lot of people say to me, oh, this is just common sense, Fiona, but until you've learnt it, it's not your common sense, it's somebody else's. So you want to think about this. The decontamination cycle. But this question is asking us specifically about cleaning between patients. Okay, 1E says between patients. So we're going to go back and we're going to look. We're going to look for, you should clean any equipment that is not disposable between each client. You may also use these things. So they're starting to tell you what to do between each client, between patients. So you might say some items need cleaning between patients. In some instances, surfaces are covered to reduce the need for cleaning those items between patients. However, any item that is not disposable, like stethoscopes, things like this, can act as a vehicle for infection. They will need to be cleaned between uses. Make sure you begin wiping down with the least dirty surface. Okay, so there's a lot in here. You just want to read through, and you're specifically being asked about wiping down between clients. So what I've just gone through is adequate as an answer. Then you want to mention the spills. You know, if there's any spills, use this process. And finally, make sure everything's dry and do the floors. So you want a little bit of a step-by-step when it says explain in no more than 100 words. What is the benefit of using surface covers? Well, there's the whole thing on surface covers. When it says, what is the benefit in using surface covers, you want to have about 4 or 5 lines there. So just, you can take what's there and bring it straight over. All right, so the next one, activity 1F, handling linen. And the question here is, what are the general principles for handling linen? Handling linen. Dirty linen should be handled carefully. General principles for handling linen. And there we are there. Now, handling linen and transporting and processing linen is a different thing. Some general linen transporting guidelines. So it says, what are the guidelines and the principles for transporting linen? Dirty linen should be removed from clinical areas where needed. Soiled linen should not be transported through public areas. So it gives you a really good outline there. All right, so we're on to 1G. How should clinical waste be handled and disposed of? Outline in no more than 100 words. Now remember, there's a difference in outline than discuss or explain. Discuss or explain. Explain is, I don't know anything, you have to tell me, you're telling me a story. Discuss is kind of, you look at both sides. You know, you look at both sides of the argument or the conversation. When it says outline, just bullet points is fine. Clinical waste should be handled and disposed of in the following way. Now it says here, what is clinical waste? And it's all of that is related waste. That's clinical and related waste. But when it comes down to how should it be handled, it'll say here, waste needs to be disposed of properly, needs to be handled in accordance with occupational health and safety guidelines. You may need PPE. Here's some PPE. So clinical waste is also known as medical waste and needs to be separated from other waste. So basically any of this stuff here would be fine for that answer. Something like, and I've got something here, clinical waste needs to be separated from other waste in a leak-proof bag or specific bin. This must be contained within the area of contamination, marked clearly with a biohazard symbol. Collected clinical waste should be stored in a locked area away from clean zones. Before transporting, tie and seal and label all waste bags. They should be given to a licensed waste contractor that will burn them in controlled conditions. So remembering clinical waste is human tissue and body parts, large quantities of hair, blood, body fluids and blood-stained clothing, blood-stained disposable material, laboratory cultures, specimens and animal tissues, and carcasses and laboratory research waste. Some of this waste can be from things like chemotherapy, stuff like that. So it can be harmful. What are the 4 colour codes of the various types of waste? Okay, so they talk to you about sharps. Cytotoxic waste, again, is the anything from the cytotoxic drugs, which is, again, your chemotherapies and things like that. Colour coding. Here's what we've got. Black, white, green. So this is not your normal colour coding. It's a bit more complicated. Normal waste, black, white, green. Clinical waste, yellow. Cytotoxic waste, purple. Radioactive waste, red. Now, what I find very interesting is they colour code with these colours, okay, for the containers. But then the stickers, so annoyingly, are mostly yellow, as you can see with that one, the clinical waste and the radioactive waste. So when you're answering this with the colour coding, this is the answer to that, because it's the containers that they go in. And we also know that in an office setting, this is not the colour coding. Red is for recycling usually. Sorry, red is for normal and yellow is for recycling. And blue is for paper. So lots of buildings, lots of cleaning environments have different colour coding techniques. So clinical waste, it says here, what 3 categories of waste exist in the workplace? Just going back up here. What 3 categories of waste exist in, I saw it. Where did I see it? General waste. Oh, back to the top of the unit. Okay, so here we've got waste. We've got 3 types: clinical waste, related waste, general waste. So clinical waste being those listed items, related waste, and then general waste. So the answer to that one is all of that, basically, the different kinds of waste. How should sharps be disposed of? Okay, question 4. So here we are, sharps. There you go. Now it says sharps must be incinerated by a licensed contractor. I know a lot of companies that the cleaners pick up the sharps wherever you go. They use gloves and tongs and a little yellow container, and they take them to the local hospital, or they take them to the local chemist, and they're incinerated there by a local contractor. You don't have to generally organise that unless you're, you know, working in a very medical sort of base cleaning job. All right, so on to activity 1H. That was a pretty big unit, pretty big chapter, that one. So this one here is suggest 3 safe work practices when handling client equipment. So handling equipment, here we are here, may increase the risk, for example. To minimize the risk, you should follow safe work practices at all times. They may include these 3. Okay, safe work practices, here's 3 examples, and that is question 1H. Outline the 2 stages of cleaning equipment, maximum 100 words. Now, just remember that when it says outline, it's asking for bullet points. So the 2 stages of cleaning equipment and disinfectant and sterilization are. So you can see here that when we're cleaning equipment or surfaces, anything actually, disinfection and sterilization are different things. This one kills microorganisms except their spores. It's required when they're body fluids. Sterilization removes organisms, including the spores. So the best way to think about it is that disinfection kills most of the stuff, not the spores. Bleach is a common disinfectant, but it's becoming very ineffective. So basically you want to say disinfection does this, sterilization does this, because that's the 2 stages of cleaning equipment. 1L, so this is a case study taking into account, so that was 1H, sorry, 1I, H-I, J-K, okay, 1I, there's a case study there, okay. Jack works in a home care for the elderly. He carries out general duties for the client, including helping them with daily activities such as dressing, bathing, and providing them with food and medication. On a routine day, one of Jack's clients is expecting one of their family members to visit the home. In passing conversation, the client mentions the family member is currently sick, having contracted a virus. Now, let's leave this before COVID. Outline the situation, which means Jack may be required to adopt additional precautions to prevent transmission. Okay, so they're asking you, what is the situation? What is the situation that is making him have extra precautions? And the situation is there's a family member who is sick who's coming to visit. Suggest an appropriate response. I'm going to leave this with you. There's no such thing as a bad response here, but think about our current world crisis, what we're currently doing if someone comes to an aged care facility who's sick. Now, I don't think that before the current situation that you're allowed to go to an aged care facility if you're sick. So it gives you a bit of information here about precautions and controls. Okay, so factors that increase the susceptibility: immune status, wounds or devices, medications, age. So you want to cover that in your suggest an appropriate response. Okay, 2A. Reflect on your workplace or one you're familiar with and identify 5 sources of infection. We're going to just use the example of a McDonald's for this one. Cafe, if you've never worked before, because you've got things like food poisoning, animals, family or friends, poor housing, sanitization, sharps, wastes, contaminated items. So these are the types of infections we're talking about in this unit. And we have the risk of the infections. How do we come about getting these infections? Here's a bunch of the things. Personal contact with infectious materials. Now, in most workplaces, that's how we get viruses and things like that. But in a clinical setting, it is a lot to do with waste, discarded items, human tissue, and basically the rubbish and the waste that they're exposed to. Because while they're in surgery, they're all masked up, gloved up, things like that. And it's when we get a little bit complacent around maybe finishing off the cleaning and we forget to put our gloves on or something like that. The risk of acquisition, that's the risk of acquiring an infectious disease, okay? What's the risk of contracting or acquiring that thing? So some environments are going to be a lot more dangerous than others. The sources of infecting microorganisms, so how do they transmute? How do they get transported between human to human? How the infection travels, whether it's airborne, skin contacts, shared surfaces, bodily fluids, or through a wound. By establishing good practice, you can avoid some of the following. Now, this is where question 2A is sources of infection. I just want you to list a couple there. Oh, sorry, it says 5. You want 5. Which is pretty much all of those. So you're basically just copying those over, to be honest. So that's question 2A. 2B, in relation to your current workplace or one you're familiar with, briefly outline your responsibilities for preventing infection control. What's your responsibility as a worker? How far does that go? I'm just trying to find, oh, we're still in that same unit. So this is where we come up on the basic microbiology, and this is really quite interesting. You know, what they need to survive, what bacteria needs to travel and survive. Fungi, as opposed to viruses. And now we're on to 2B. What's your area of responsibility? Responding to situations that pose a risk. What are some of the things that you can do? For operations to run smoothly, it's everyone's important. Everyone has area of responsibility. Too much or too little responsibility is not helpful and should be outlined in your role. Responding to situations that pose risk, our responsibility should be outlined when you took your role. If you need to remind yourself or confirm the questions, you might have to speak to the relevant person. But what we're asking for is, what is your responsibility? Now, it says here that you have a few responsibilities in accordance with the state legislation. You need to be willing to think about hazards and risks. You also need to be willing to wear PPE, undertake your training and things like that. You need to follow the protocols that you've been given. Okay, you need to be willing to undertake the training that's given to you. You need to take time to read through your organisation's policies and procedures. And what we know about infection control, some of your other responsibilities is come to work showered. I am still always surprised by how many cleaners come to work not showered. It's your way of making sure that you don't bring any bodily contaminations to work that's not necessary. Wearing clean clothing every day. You don't know what you got on those pants yesterday. Washing your hands between work tasks. Cleaning and disinfecting all of your equipment before and after use. Not using other people's equipment because you can't be bothered going back to the cleaning room, stuff like that. Responding to infection control policies. Eliminating hazards where possible. That's the answer. 2C, outline one way to assess risk. The best way to assess risk is with a risk matrix. These are the questions you ask when you're assessing the risk. But this risk matrix down here is the best way to identify a hazard and its risk. So on one side, you've got the likelihood of it happening, and this is the impact if it does happen. So this is not one I've seen before. This highlighting is a little bit difficult, but normally what will happen is any of these ones here all the way down to here would be green. Okay, so even though this is an extreme outcome, it happens really rarely. So it's a low to medium, but you can see all these ones are low. Low, medium, 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 high, high. So this has a lot of options. There's a lot of risk matrices that are a lot easier. So for example, I'm sitting here at my computer with an open jug of water, and I've got a power board just to the left of me. So if this water was put on that power board, the likelihood of me injuring myself is quite high, and the impact of it would be quite high too. Now, all I need to do is put a lid on that and I drop it down to low. So a risk matrix provides categorization of the risks and the hazards and puts it into a priority table. Simple as that. That's what your answer needs to be. And then you can refer to this template or go and find a much simpler risk matrix online and use it. 2D, give an example of how you might document activities and tasks that put self, clients, and visitors at risk. Give an example how you might document those activities. Documenting and reporting. Okay, it'll be necessary to document and report. So the best way to document and report is with something like an action table or a incident report form. I would say that in hospitals and in this instance, you'd need basically a table where you've got things like what the activity is, what the hazard is, what the risk was, and what you can do to fix it. I also like dates and times and the people who came across it, to be honest with you, because if you have a register, a hazard register, and you go to it and you see needle, 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 you want to know, is this in the same area? Is this different areas? Is this the same person? When was this? Who detected this? How did that come about? So a little bit of a story can be helpful. What information do you need to include in an incident report form? So here's reporting incident, and there is what you need. All of the information that you can have. Who was there? So date and the time, details of the incident, name of everyone, not just the person who's exposed, but the people who were there to see it. I remember I had a cleaner fall over and they did the incident report form, and that was all fine. Anyway, it turns out that she had finished work and gone and put songs on and just come back in and slipped over. So here we were thinking we had a real incident on our hands. We couldn't figure out why it had come about, how our protocols had fallen down. And it turned out that someone who was there said, oh yeah, but she was wearing thongs. So having everybody who's there involved in the chatting about it can help you diagnose where you went wrong and how you can be safer next time. Question 2E, outline the hierarchy of control. So what are control measures? Because risks and hazards are inevitable, but control measures make them a little less likely. What is reasonably practicable? Practical. What's reasonably practical? It is called practicable, but it just means what's practical. How far are we going to go with this? And what's the likelihood it's actually going to, between me and my printer, I could put a $500 barrier, I could put a $3,000 safety switch, but is it practical? Wouldn't it be more practical that I just don't drink water in my office? The hierarchy of control. The hierarchy is a way of risky ranking. So it's controlling risks from the highest level to the lowest level. The highest level is the most practical. Now, I really do not like this example. I do not like, I'm just going to see if I can move this over there. This hierarchy of control is really hard to understand. So I'm going to look one up. Okay. This is the most commonly used hierarchy of control that I've ever seen. I was in safety for many years. And the most effective is at the top and the least effective is at the bottom. And it's just as simple as that. Now, when you see this, most effective, least effective, elimination means to remove the hazard altogether. Substitution, replace the hazard. Engineering controls, isolate the hazard. Administrative controls, change the way people work or put a sign up, make a policy or a procedure. PPE, personal protective equipment. So let's use the example of the fact that I have my drink of water near the power. To eliminate the hazard, which is the electricity, I could remove the power pack altogether. Electricity be gone. But I might not be able to do my job without it. So I might be able to substitute it, change it to a battery pack. But a battery pack is going to be susceptible to water anyway. So then we wind up at engineering controls. I could put a barrier up or I could put a lid on my drink. We could also put a sign up to say, please note when working at your desk, no open glasses, only sealed bottles. And PPE is irrelevant. This here, this hierarchy of control, which I'm going to take a photo of and I'm going to put it on the Facebook page for you. That's the hierarchy of control I want to see in this answer. And that is for question 2E, the hierarchy of control. Question 3A. Now, with the hierarchy of control, you're following organisations' policies and procedures. Now, Spaulding's classification is a recognised approach to risk management, approach to disinfectant and sterilisation, which identifies what categories need to be done when. So Spaulding's classification of non-critical, critical, semi-critical under the Queensland Health Guidelines makes it really easy to understand what should and shouldn't be sanitised and disinfected and when. So we're on to activity 3A. What are the protocols for care following exposure to blood or other bodily fluids? protocols for care following exposure to bodily fluids may include but are not limited to. I'm just going to pop the full screen on and I'm going to mute you, Nicole, for a minute. We are up to, we're just walking through the questions at the moment, and we're up to activity 3A in infection control. And I know you've done some of this, so we shouldn't be too much longer till we're into the stuff that you need. But I'm just going to finish recording this and then we'll jump into that. So basically the protocols for care following exposure to blood or other bodily fluids are these ones here. And you can bring those over as a list. You can copy those straight over. Now you do want to add in this section here to that question. You want to add in that used instruments should be rinsed. Soiled instruments need to be put into a decontamination area. Question 2 on that one is, what are the procedures for people who are exposed to bodily fluids? And you've got that here. There you go. So it's all of those that you want to be listing. Encourage bleeding, wash with soap, rinse if eyes, if they enter the mouth, spit them out, rinse with water multiple times. They've actually said that blood actually remains. So a contaminated piece of clothing with 2 drops of blood can be washed in a washing machine between 3 and 5 times, and the presence of blood will still be identified by a sniffer dog. So when you sort of think, oh, I got blood on me, I'll just give it a quick rinse, multiple times. So 3B, we're up to 3B now. What are the protocols? Sorry, refer to the case study. Create a sign which outlines which is appropriate for Louise to use to warn people of a slippery surface. That's really easy, that one. Just a wet floor sign. Any of these, well, these two, this one. Do not enter, exclamation mark, that sort of thing will be fine. Question 2, where should she place the sign? Now, the answer that's given me here, where it says, you know, signage needs to be understood, and then back up here it says common signs, the areas that they must be used. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is pretty common denominator is that people will say the sign should be placed as close to the hazard as it can be in clear view of everybody. Sometimes you need to place the hazard sign a little bit away from the hazard so they see it before they're there, and the wet floor sign's a good example of that. A lot of people put a wet floor sign in the middle of a wet floor. It needs to be at the door before you hit the wet floor. Okay, activity 3C. What is involved in removing spills? Removing spills, this may involve. List the products or the procedures, sorry, list the procedures to follow to remove large spills. So we've got removing spills, and then we've got normal spills here for larger spills here. And you just want to use those 2 lists. Identify 2 differences between removing a large and a small spill. Well, I think that that's pretty clear. I'm going to leave that to you to identify that, but one of those is right there with the fact that you don't use a mop for little spills. 3D, identify 3 precautions you can take to minimise contamination from aerosols and splatter. Minimising contamination. Minimising contamination may include the following. So there it is there. And that's the answer to question 3C3. So we're over to 3D at the moment, and I'm just going to unmute Nicole and see if she's... How do I unmute? There you go.
It came up on mine to confirm it.
Oh, okay. Are you with us? You're with us on 3D?
Yep.
All right, we'll keep mowing through then. Oh. Sorry, I muted you again.
That's okay. I just said, sorry, I'm late.
Oh, that's fine. That's why I thought I'll just jump into recording this for everyone, and then we'll go into the actual questions. So probably
No, I'm
another.
glad that I didn't miss anything that I hadn't already.
No, you're pretty good, and we're almost finished too.
I
So
can go back over the video. You're posting the video, aren't you? So I can go back
yeah,
over if there's
yeah,
anything that I need to look at. So
yeah. We're a couple of questions from done anyway. Okay. All right. So just back to question 3D. There it is. There. That's the answer there. 3E, identify one use of a clean zone. I love the idea. I love this concept. Clean zones and dirty zones. Like I wish I had them in my house where I could be like, don't put that there. That's a clean zone. But it doesn't work like that. Clean zone is basically an area that's used for storage of equipment, sterile areas, or administration areas. Nice and clean. Everything in there is clean. Nothing goes in there that's dirty. Dirty zones may be those that are used for cleaning areas for instruments and disposal. So that's question 1 and question 2 under 3E. Suggest one way in which clean and contaminated zones can be separated. Well, let's have a look and see if it gives us that here. Well, it says they need to be closed off, need to be well established so they remain clean. I think one of the ways that you might do there is that they need to be separate areas. They probably can't be one side of a room and another side of a room. But, you know, as long as the area can be shut off, could be a cupboard even inside a room. You know, you might go to the dentist and notice that on one side of the room is all the instruments and on the other side of the room is very clean. But those different examples. And then using signage, you can use signage to maintain and basically to ensure that you have this separated, you'll need to do this. Okay, so how they stay separated and how they stay clean. I don't know if you can hear, but my dog is snoring on the ground right next to me. All right, 3F. So we're up to refer to the case study and answer below. So 3F carries out confinement and clean zones, cabinets for administration, what a contaminated zone is, reprocessing equipment, so the order, non-critical, semi-critical, and critical. And then we've got a case study here, okay? So basically, there's been a lot of overthinking on this 3F. It says, suggest how Delia could confine the equipment and material she's prepared once appointed with Christy her appointment with Christy has been carried out. Consider the clean and contaminated zone. This could just be quite simply her administration records should remain in the designated clean zone, the filing cabinet, and the medicaments, which is all the medical requirements, should be disposed of in the contaminated zone using the fluid waste bin. So there's been a lot of students having trouble with that question. It's not supposed to be difficult. It's drawing on all the information that you've just learnt in that unit. So that is the introduction to infection control and the activities booklet covered.